Without further ado, I give you Henry Fisher.
Thank you, guys.
So when you sell a bowl, is it a Fisher Price?
What kind of fishing do you do?
Sorry.
We're here all night.
We're here all night. Yep. I'll try to get you out of here by 10, 11. We'll be good.
Relax, it's turn to bacon.
As Barry said, my name is Henry Fisher. I don't get super excited about speaking in public, so you just have to bear with me. I'll do the best I can. So I started turning in 2020. Was not related to COVID at all. It just, I think I saw a guy on YouTube. I think that's what got me started. And so bought my first lathe. It was just a little old Craftsman, had a 9-inch swing on it. It was not a bowl turning lathe, even though I wanted to turn bowls. But it was a cheap lathe, and it was something for me to kind of, get started and kind of get a taste for bowl turning. So I turned my first bowl in June of 2020, and it was a little cup bowl, whatever. It's really not a pretty bowl or anything, but I still have it. Occasionally I pull it out of the cupboard just to look at it and see where I started. So that was June of 2020. So I went through, well, that lathe got upgraded, and then the next lathe got upgraded to the lathe I'm currently on, is the new lathe from Nova, the Nebula. It came out almost a year ago now. I've had it for about 10 months. I've had that lathe. Just fantastic lathe. Has an 18-inch swing, 2.5 horse direct drive motor on it, so no belts or pulleys to deal with. So that's the lathe I'm on now. Works really well. If anybody has any questions, if you want to upgrade to that size lathe, I'd love to talk to you about that one, because I really like it. And it's a shorter bed. It's an 18-inch swing. It's about 24, 25 inches between center. I forget. It's a shorter bed. But that's not why I'm here tonight to talk about lathes. Ben asked me a while ago if I wanted to do a demo on like epoxy wood hybrid combination bowls. So initially, because I'm a little weird, when I called him back, I said, no, I'm too busy. I don't have time for that. But throughout the course of the conversation, I talked myself into it. So here we are. So I want to talk about, and hopefully I can hit on the 3 things that Barry mentioned earlier about being interesting, whatever the 3 things were for a demo guy. Hopefully I can be all 3. I don't know. We'll see. So, Ben asked me to do an epoxy demo. Well, I was thinking through that, that as a hobby turner, this project can take, I don't know, 2 weeks or something. And I thought you guys might get bored if we're here for a couple of weeks just watching epoxy dry. So I ended up just doing a slideshow. The bowls are actually this set here is the one that we're going to be walking through and showing. My main focus will be on the casting part of it. This is from a cherry burl I harvested from my brother's place in Myerstown. Big cherry tree he had cut down that I happened to stop in before he cut it up into firewood or whatever he was going to do with it. And the tree had a total of 4 burls on the tree. So, and this is the second to smallest burl out of the 4. So, I want to go through the process, start to finish on this bowl set, and then also I also want to talk about what I'm doing with the bowls once they're done. What happens next? So I think we're ready to start, John. All right, so there is the cherry burl. I used a 1/2-inch chisel and hammer just to clean off all the bark. Let me just double check my notes here that I don't miss anything. So when prepping these burls, you want to make sure you clean off all the bark, get everything nice and clean, so you don't end up with all kinds of like weird little floaty bits and stuff in your finished project. Next slide. And then, so after that, so I harvested this burl, I think it was in like February of 2022. So it's been about 1.5 years. But the blank wasn't completely dried. and I had cut it to round on my circle cutting jig on the bandsaw. But in order to completely dry it out, I don't have a kiln, so except maybe I do. My wife has an oven in her kitchen. So she's used to it by now, kind of. She walks in the kitchen, she sees the oven's on, like, what's going on? Open the oven door. Oh, here I have a bowl blank in the oven at 180 degrees. So let it sit there for a few hours, do that a few different times. Get that thing nice and dried. The plastic bowl you see behind there, the purple bowl, that is a nice, just a cheap bowl set that I got off of Amazon that I use for molds for this kind of stuff. It works really well. Also, take note of the rough turn bowl in the background, because I have something to do with that thing later. Those colors you see there, that's a cherry burl as well. Yes, just like a core out of another project I had done. My 7-year-old daughter picked out the colors for that one. So we'll get to that one at the end if we still have time. All right, next slide. So next is to turn the blank down so it fits in the purple bowl, the mold. Next slide. And then I used a wire wheel on the lathe mounted in my Jacob's chuck to clean off all that little the brown film you see on there, that paper-like film underneath the bark. Make sure everything's good and clean. Next slide. There it is, cleaned off, and there's a good shot of the Nova lathe too. As you can see, my weapons of choice there are my 1/2-inch chisel, air nozzle, compressed air, and a dental pick. Dental pick to get down into the little cracks and stuff. Yeah, you can buy them off of Amazon, or when you go to the dentist, just ask them for their old broken ones. I've done that a couple times already and get them for free. Let's see here. And the thing with the brass brush, it does a really good job of cleaning off the blank, and it also gives a rough surface on the bowl blank to give the resin a good tooth to bite into. Next slide. There we are, an up close picture of it ready to go into the mold. All right, next slide. All right, it's time to measure for epoxy, which can be really interesting for a piece like this. How do you know how much epoxy to mix up? So I forgot to mention, I should back up. Most of my methods and things that I use, I learn off of good old YouTube University, right? Jim Sprague Wood Turning is a guy up in Canada that I follow his channel very closely, and most of just about everything I'm doing here, I learned from him. So I should give the credit where credit is due. If you want to go check out his videos, if you're into the YouTube videos, and if you're into these type of projects, he has an excellent channel. He just recently hit 100,000 subscribers, and just a really, really great guy. His videos are a little bit longer, but I don't mind. So how do we measure for resin or epoxy? I keep calling it resin, epoxy. I know there's technicalities between all those, but either way, I guess technically it is epoxy, but I tend to call it resin, whatever. So the rice method, I filled the plastic bowl with rice, and buy that stuff for cheap at the dollar store, $2 or whatever for a 2-pound bag of white rice. Pour that in the bowl and take the blank and like shove it down, wiggle it down into the rice until you're pretty well filled up. And next slide. That's the amount of rice it took to actually, or pretty well fill that up. Next slide. Then from there I mix it. I dump the rice into a mixing cup. So as you can see there, we'll round it down to 40 ounces of rice. So 40 ounces of rice, 40 ounces of epoxy, right? Nope, wrong. Because the rice doesn't actually fill all the cracks and voids and everything in the blank, and the rice is also a granular product. So you take so since we're measuring by volume, we take the amount of rice and we add 40% to that. So 40 ounces of rice plus 40% is 56 ounces, I think. Yeah, 56 ounces. So 56 ounces of epoxy we'll need for this one. Next slide. So for this project, this was my first time using designer epoxy. It's a deep casting epoxy from designer epoxy. It's a 2-to-1 mix ratio. This is also a Canadian company. Again, picked this up from Sprague Woodturning, or that's how I found out about it. I had been using, like this other project I have up here. This is Total Boat epoxy. They're deep cast, they're thick set. But now that designer epoxy kind of changed some of their pricing around, it's actually a little bit cheaper than Total Boat. So, and you can cast more at a time than you can with the Total Boat.
Can you tell us what that costs for that?
That gallon and a half, what did I pay for that? I forget. I know I just last week I got another 3-gallon kit because I thought I couldn't afford not to get it, because they had a sale, a short sale that they ran. It was $200 for a 3-gallon kit, which is pretty cheap for that. Plus, so it was free shipping. Plus, I had a 10% off coupon code from Jim Sprague. So shipped to my house for 3 gallons of epoxy was $187, I think. So, and it has like a 12 to 14 months shelf life.
How thick you can cast it? Did they say?
I see Jim casting 5-6 liters at a time. Massive in a 5-gallon bucket. You know,
It's a gallon and a half.
I mean, he gets up to 6-7 liters. Sometimes it cracks on him, which he fills it in. He doesn't care. Sometimes he intentionally has thermal cracking in his pieces. But
This is all air cured, right?
this is correct, in a pressure pot.
Oh, in a pressure.
Yeah.
So it has to be pressure casted.
It doesn't have to.
Oh, okay.
No, it just, I had done some, I forget how many ounces of epoxy it was that I had done before I got a pressure pot. I just got the pressure pot like 2 months ago. So and it does do a better job in a pressure pot.
You said it was 2-to-1. Is that by weight or volume?
Volume. That's by volume. Yeah. That's why the rice method works as well. Don't know how you would convert that by weight. I do everything by
Are the
volume.
two products of the same density? In other words, if you took a quart of the hardener and a quart of the resin, would they both weigh the same?
No.
No, it's
No, the resin,
It's for volume. It goes by volume.
Yeah. the hardener is like
I'm used to
water.
using a scale.
Okay. Yeah, that's a whole different conversion for by weight. I have no idea. Some guys do, but I have no idea. I just do everything by volume. Next slide. Oh. Okay. So, sorry, going back to the previous slide, I mixed up all 56 ounces of resin. So my idea was to mix the whole thing in one cup and then set it aside for a few hours and let it come up in temperature. And the reason I wanted to do that, I was hoping to have it come up to like about 115 degrees or something, because I separated the epoxy out into different cups, and the 3 different colors you see there is the emerald green and the Caribbean blue and the pearl pure white. So I was hoping to have more color separation, which with this epoxy, you want to let it sit for a while and let it warm up, which is its natural process. And then you pour it, little of this color, a little bit of that, want to just keep going so you get some color separation. So I mixed up the epoxy and then set that aside, and next slide. And then I went back to building the mold and getting the piece ready for casting. So my base there, let's see here. Yeah, so the base is just a piece of wood I had on the shelf in the shop. Cut that to round on my bandsaw and the circle cutting jig. And then I covered that piece with Tyvek tape. Couple reasons. Epoxy doesn't adhere to Tyvek tape. Or there's what's the other one? Tuck tape, I think. I don't know. I had Tyvek tape on hand, so that's what I used. And it also will prevent the epoxy from seeping through, because that piece of wood was a glued together piece of shelving or something I had gotten from Lowe's. I was concerned about the epoxy possibly seeping through that. So cover it with Tyvek tape, and then the bowl blank, I actually shimmed that up just a little bit, raised it up off the piece because there were some cracks in the top, well, in this picture, the bottom, that I wanted to make sure the epoxy can get in underneath that piece to fill all the cracks and everything in there. And then I put a couple of spots of hot melt glue in there around the edges just to hold it in place. Next slide. Then I put the purple bowl on top of that. As you can see, I glued the snot out of it. I want to make sure this thing doesn't leak. Okay, get one shot at it. Well, I guess you could recast it, but then you just have a big disaster in your pressure pot. So glued it up real good. I put this the plastic cup on top so that I have a reservoir. I can over pour the piece because the piece will absorb some of the epoxy, and as it's drying and as it's in the pressure pot. So it's a good idea to have a reservoir, somewhere to draw from. Otherwise, you might take the piece out of the pot 3 days later and it's not fully encased in epoxy.
Now, did you use silicone to seal that?
That's all hot melt glue.
That's hot melt glue?
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that stick to the Tyvek tape?
Yes. The plastic bowl, I sprayed the inside with a mold release, but then before I glued, like around the two edges where I was going to glue onto, I used some denatured alcohol and wiped it off real good, because I don't think hot melt glue will stick to mold release. But in this case, it held together really well. And I had drilled a 1.5 inch hole in the bottom of the plastic bowl. In this case, it's on the top, but everything's upside down. All right, next slide. And just to make sure it doesn't leak, wrap it all up with duct tape. Gotta have duct tape on every project, right?
When in doubt, duct it out.
And the ears you see on there, the tabs hanging out over, those are just handles for lifting it in and out of the pressure pot. All right, next slide. Then at this point, I separated the epoxies into the 3 different colors. So the primary color is the emerald green on the right-hand side there. And then the Caribbean blue, I did a little less on that, and then the smaller amount of the white. I did end up, go ahead to the next slide. I did end up casting it earlier than I wanted to, because we had plans that evening, and the epoxy was at only 100 degrees, I think, when I cast it. But I figured, well, I don't want to come back in 3 hours to 3 cups of hard epoxy. Don't ask me how I figured that one out. I forgot to bring those along. I have 5 cups of hard epoxy that I guess
turn those though.
exactly. I want to make little like wine tumblers or something out of those. But
So you can let the epoxy with the hardener in set for hours before you have to pour it?
yeah, keep an eye on it. This designer epoxy you can let that sit for 5-6 hours. 8 hours maybe. You might have about the consistency of honey. All right, where are we at here? epoxy into the mold and set it in the pressure pot. That is the California Air 5-gallon pressure pot that I picked up. I guess that's about 2 months ago now. Woodcraft had a sale on it. It was a good excuse to go to Woodcraft.
What is the diameter of that, do you know?
It's a 15 inches. It's the size of a 5-gallon bucket. Whatever that is. Next slide.
When you're ready to pour it, what's the thickness of it? Excuse me, what's the thickness of it? Is it like,
Of the epoxy.
yeah, is it like dish liquid? Is it
In
like water?
in this case,
Snot?
it was depends how bad your cold is. It was somewhere between water and room temperature honey.
Okay.
But if you're waiting, viscosity has to increase.
Mhm.
And if the viscosity is increasing, once you pour it in there, you want to push that with your pressure into all those little crevices.
That's where that trade-off.
Yeah, because if you
Yeah.
wait too long, you're not going to be able to impregnate the wood all the way through.
Right.
So can
There's-
you pour it like right, instead of waiting for it to come up to a certain temperature, can you go ahead and put it in your piece
Yeah.
and let it sit in there?
Yeah, you can pour it right away.
And then-
The reason I want to wait is I'm trying to kind of keep some color separation to get some nice marbling in the
So
casting.
you're saying if you pour it in when it's first mixed, then that all those colors are going to combine
They might all just blend and become one color.
in, okay, and then you're also going to worry about the heat of it too. Doesn't it get pretty hot?
They will, yeah. This one did.
Do you like put it in any kind of refrigeration or?
You
No.
know,
Nice.
that's
No.
you want
I
it
mean,
to get hot. So
this one, this piece is total boat, and I think the thick set, I think they say they recommend like 16 ounces or something. I forget how many ounces this was. It was closer to 60. And the pressure pot was warm to the touch.
Yeah, because they're saying like,
Yeah.
you want to keep it like 60 degrees or.
Well, some
of the
resins
bigger
won't,
cats.
some resins might not set up at such a low temperature.
Okay.
That's, this one did crack.
If you're doing really
Big
big
pieces.
pours, then you want to put it in a cool room, but that's not going to be in a pressure pot.
No,
Right.
You won't have a table size in a pressure pot.
Actually, I did.
Yeah, that
But-
Underground Railroad guy, he would take his
Mhm.
pressure pot and put it in a freezer chest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're trying to slow down the process because of how large
Okay.
because of how big your pour is. Yeah. All right. Where are we at by now? Okay. Yeah, pressurize the pot to 50 psi. That pot, the max psi in there is 60. So, I mean, different people have.
valves are checked.
Yeah, different people have different opinions, I'm sure, on what your actual pressure should be. I've been doing 50 and it works just fine. So, and then next slide is actually a short video of holding the piece. I ended up, well, I shortened this video. I was taking too much time.
Hardware.
This one, the open assembly I had, it's designed for throughout the course of 3 days. I had opened this thing multiple times and added, well, no, the first day while so, when I took it out, as you can see, there was nothing left. Okay.
On the back of the ball.
one actually goes apart for these. Ta-da! Wyatt has that little void in there, which I got a little obsessed over. Little OCD going on here. Wyatt had that void cut because the epoxy level was above that in some other areas, but it was a non-issue. So, they would if you, but you'll get a witness line. You'd have a line in there. That's why I don't really do it. The wood has a lot of air in it, and it would take forever to get the air out before you get the epoxy.
But then the heat of the created in the exothermic reaction in the epoxy creates the bubbles also. So the pressure pot just forces them smaller that you don't see them versus the vacuum.
Yeah. And the
Shorter.
those bubbles that come up,
Can I say exothermic?
those bubbles that come up from the vacuum don't really pop on by themselves, right? Which it doesn't, it just compresses the bubbles where you can't
doesn't
see
take
it.
the bubbles out, it makes them smaller, so you can't see
You
it.
can't see them with the naked eye. Yeah. All right, time to get to some turning. Next slide. So I drilled a hole in the bottom, 1¼ inch or something with a Forstner bit, only because I wanted to mount it between centers, and the spur drive can't really bite into epoxy very well. So I wanted to get down to bare wood so that the spur drive on the lathe has something to grab a hold of. Next slide. Here we are mounted between centers. And next slide is another short video.
In the semi-transparent epoxy,
Yeah,
they look awesome.
yeah, I've seen guys do that already. But the stuff is fairly, well, the bulk of it is easy to clean up. You just kind of grab the whole thing and throw it in the trash because it all cleans together, even though it's a massive disaster. All right, next slide. So there it is. The outside profile is done. If you notice, I have a small tenon on the top of the bowl. That way I can flip it over and still mount it in my 4-jaw chuck. Next slide. Then I glued a waste block on the bottom, even though this waste block is not actually the one I used. What I did initially, and I flipped it over, mounted it. I was working on setting up my coring rig, and I noticed that something seems a little weird with the bowl. I had just hot glued it on. I grabbed a hold of the bowl and just pulled it right off. But well, that didn't work. So I put a new one on. I knew this is just a piece of maple. Put a new glue block on the bottom. I used 5-minute epoxy from JB Well, and that time it held up. Next slide. So here we are set up with the Bowl Saver coring system from Woodcut Tools. That's the smaller of the two knives. The diameter of the big bowl, the mother bowl, is like somewhere around 9 inches. So the smaller, that smaller knife will cut, I think it's 8 inches. So I'm set up for that. Next slide, another. I have. All right, next slide. That's just a still shot of the core. I mean, I didn't get it. Got some color separation in the piece, not as much as I was hoping for, but I'm very happy with how the piece came out with the coloring and everything. Next slide. So then I finished turning that and started sanding. All of us, our favorite part, right? Sanded it from 60 grit all the way up to 600 using a 2-inch disc on the drill. Next slide. I sanded the outside the same thing. Next slide. There I did have a couple little repairs on the inside, little cracks that were left. That was in the wood. There were no cracks or anything in the epoxy itself. Use thin CA glue from Starbond with the accelerator so I can just set it quick. You know, you can kind of sand it back and keep moving. Next slide. So, finishing process. So I sanded it to 600 grit, and then I hit it with the triple E buffing wheel from Beal Buffing System that I just mount in my drill as well. And then wipe it off. So I hit it with the triple E buffing wheel before each coat. So after the final coat, there's nothing done to it. Polish it with the triple E and then wipe it down with denatured alcohol to make sure you get any compound, any junk off of there. Next slide. And first coat of finish is on. That just shows a shot of, I had a light on the other side shining through the piece. Gives it kind of a, what I was hoping for was kind of an underwater cavern look, because I figured I would have these lines of wood with the islands of the epoxy just because of the way the piece was before I started. Next slide.
What's the finish you're using on that?
Sorry, that is Waterlocks. Waterlocks gloss. I did, actually the inside only has 2 coats on. I thought I'd have to do 3, but the outside I ended up, it had some texture. I should have probably done the inside too. The outside had some like little, I don't know, it wasn't nice and smooth that I ended up polishing again a 3rd time later and put a really thin 3rd coat on and cleaned it up really nice. All right, and that's the inside of the piece. The inside was done, everything, all of that finish, 2 coats were done on the lathe. Next slide. It's just another shot of the outside of the bowl. All right, next slide. And then it's time to finish off the bottom. I have this Longworth style chuck that I can mount the bowl and finish off the bottom, sand it down, and then brand it and put a coat of finish. Actually, I think I did the finish on the bottom off the lathe. And I turned the smaller bowl. Everything was done exactly the same as the big bowl. I don't have any pictures of that process. It's just repeating the process again. Next slide. So there's the finished product. For those of you out in Zoom land, you get to see them on here. I do have the bowls with me here in-house, so you guys get to see them in person. And that I ended up, the smaller bowl, I ended up coring it again. So I could have had a 3-bowl set, except that core had just one little crack that was filled with epoxy. And I thought at this point, it's just going to be a little wooden dish that's not even going to match the set because of the lack of epoxy. If I did keep that, I don't know, probably incorporate it somewhere in a, maybe for a base on a future piece or something, because it's still a really neat cherry pearl piece, but I figured it's not going to match this set. So next slide. Just another shot of the outside. The big bowl measures 9 inches in diameter. Sorry, I should have taken pictures up close a little more. But the big bowl is 9 inches in diameter by 3 3/4 inches high. The smaller one is 7 inches by 2 5/8. Next slide. There's a picture of the bottom. Can you zoom in on that picture by any chance? I just have a kind of a subtle foot on the bottom. I like to put feet on all of my pieces. I like the piece to be elevated off the surface a little bit. So the branding iron I use is an electric branding iron from Rockler, and it works really well as long as I remember to plug it in while I'm still finishing the bottom. Sometimes I'm like, shoot, I have to sit and wait for the branding iron to heat up. Next slide. That's just the inside of the larger bowl. Next slide is the inside of the smaller bowl. Doesn't have a ton of epoxy in. Well, not on the inside. It had more on the outside, but not a ton of it came through. But the next slide. So that one was putting a light on it from the top, just so I wanted to see what kind of effect it has with shining a light through, and you get that underwater kind of cavern effect on it again. All right. Any questions or anything?
Are you going to talk at all about the tortoise shell looking? I'm
This
curious
one?
about how you got the kind of tortoise shelly kind of, it's like peachy with.
Sure, I can touch on it. I don't have any
Okay.
pictures of it or anything. This is the first project I ever did in my pressure pot. This is just a couple offcuts of a maple burl that, which camera are we on?
Camera two,
I don't know. It's the
One
overhead
behind
bit.
Oh, right behind
One
you, right behind.
It's the one behind. And
Now it's this
at the monitor.
Now, here we go, we got this.
There we go. So this was some maple burl cutoffs, and the coloring. Now this is total boat epoxy, but that's a matter of I had, I think, 3 different colors, and it was the same method. I just mixed the colors separate and then poured a little of that, and it just, that's what it did. It had a pretty amazing effect. On the inside, I don't know if the lighting is going to allow me to do it. See the beast that showed up in there?
See it.
Ah, stupid shiny finish.
How thin can you make the bowl when you're doing epoxy?
I'm sorry?
How thin can you make the wall of the bowl when you're doing epoxy? Is there a recommended thickness you should be over, or is it just as thin as you feel nervous? Until you feel
As
nervous?
thin as you're comfortable. I like hefty bowls for some reason.
I was just thinking
Maybe.
about the trade-off between the thickness and the translucence.
Yes, the thinner you go, the more translucent it will be. I don't know if the lighting will allow me to do
It
it here.
also depends how concentrated mica mix you do with
Yes.
your resin.
I
That
tend
would be
to-
good. Go heavy.
I tend to mix heavy. Camera might not pick it up too well.
It does.
But yeah, I tend to mix my epoxy heavy. And this one,
What do you mean by heavy, Henry?
the colors, sorry. The
Concentration of
colors,
this
the
mica.
color concentration with the mica powders. I just tend to go heavy on it. And this one, this is a core out of this guy. It had cracked. There were no cracks in this one, but there were in this one, which I repaired it. I can still find the crack, only because I know where it is.
What's that last one?
This one is just one I thought I'd bring along, just a recent.
No epoxy in that one.
There's no epoxy. This is me just seeing what I can do with the Waterlocks finish on a all wood product bowl. This is hackberry,
Flip it, that one, yeah.
the hackberry set. Now this is the Waterlocks medium sheen that had some bug holes in it over here and over here. But so yeah, I finished this with the Waterlocks medium sheen and came up with a really nice finish. I think my opinion is a piece like this covered in the gloss finish, it would, as some people would say, it looked like wood covered in plastic. Maybe, I don't know. But personally, I was really happy with how that turned out. All right, so what happens next? You have that slide?
Henry,
Sorry, go ahead.
If you get a dimple or something in your epoxy on that bowl, how do you repair that? Like if there's a bubble, even, it's not supposed to be there, but
This one has a tiny little bubble right there that
do
I should have turned it away.
you
Uh,
use CA?
You can, I mean, that's how I repaired this crack. What is it again? Right here. That's how I repaired this crack.
Do you put color in your CA or any?
On this one, I did not. Something I've seen Jim Sprague do. He will sometimes intentionally pour way more epoxy than he should. He did that recently on a recent video because the epoxy was about to expire. So he just poured this huge casting with epoxy that was not meant for deep casting, and it cracked all over the place. So then he casts it again with like a gold color for the kintsugi method, where you take a piece of broken pottery or whatever and you fix it with a like gold color or something. So there would be that option. If it does crack or you get holes or something, you can, if you can figure out a way to have it enhance the piece rather than just look like broke and now I just kind of sort of repaired it. All right, that last slide, there we go. So what happens next to the finished product? So about a year ago, December of last year, this was actually my first ever Makers Market event I did. That's my son sitting in the background. He was helping us out. This was actually at Lancaster County Christian School, which is where my kids go. They do, first Saturday in December, they do what's called a Christmas marketplace. And I don't know if anybody here is not familiar with Makers Markets, what they are. Everybody know what a Makers Market is. It's a market type of setting where local artisans will, you reserve a booth and you, like for example, me as a woodturner had a booth there. It's typically it's all handmade stuff like jewelry. You might have cutting boards or apparel or just all kinds of stuff. Local, like I said, local artisans getting together and to sell their product. And as you notice, the Zoe stuff, Zoe banners and everything. So, Zoe International is an organization that fights human trafficking. I'll just read this, just a little description of who Zoe is. Zoe International is a Christian organization that rescues and cares for orphans in danger and children who have been sold or are at risk of being sold into human trafficking worldwide. So there's a very dear friend of mine, Brad Hortensi, I met him at the church I attend here in New Holland. Met him a number of years ago. So he, I'm not sure, it's getting close to 10 years ago, I think, he started working for Zoe International. Him and his wife actually moved to Thailand. His background is in law enforcement, detective work, pretty much his entire life. So, and he had been working here with the local police department. He set up an online, like a cyber forensics unit that he was able to track down and arrest guys that were involved in child pornography. So then eventually Zoe International got a hold of him and he moved to Thailand to set up a cyber forensics unit there with, because Zoe International has a home in Thailand and they're working, in rescuing kids that are caught in sex trafficking. So he was there for, I forget, 5 years at least, 7 years, something like that. Set up this whole unit. He was working with Zoe International, which they were working with the Royal Thai Police, working with the high-ranking officials in Thailand, that he was the direct contact in setting all this up. So, and Zoe International, from a global perspective, they're based in LA, but they have locations in Thailand, Australia, Mexico, Japan, and US. So that's kind of the global where they are. But now, Brad and his wife moved back to the States. They're back in the area, and he is now the director of Zoe East Coast. He works very closely with what was it he wanted me to? Unfortunately, he couldn't be here tonight. I had asked him if he could come and share kind of what he does and what Zoe does, but unfortunately he couldn't make it. So he works very closely with the Lancaster and Berks County task forces, and like he would work with all the like the Lancaster Berks County DA's office and the surrounding counties are working on, combating human trafficking, because a lot of us might not know, but it does happen right here in our backyards. So just, I have a bunch of literature up here. This one is specifically Zoe East Coast. You can feel free to come up and check this out afterward. This one talks about, their work, human trafficking awareness, training and prevention work, and then advocacy services, working with at-risk teenagers, kids, and then outreach, reaching out to local children's homes, children's shelters, and then task force coordination and collaboration, where so Brad and his team are a part of every sting operation that happens here in Lancaster, Berks counties and this area, and that type of thing, and working on prevention work as well. So a while ago, I got to thinking that, I'm building up this inventory of product. Like, we need an outlet, which, Tom, I had an idea when you were trying to figure out what to do with your product. So I've been working with Brad. We have been brainstorming ways that I could sell my product and, kind of mesh that together with Zoe and how that all works. So December of last year, we did our first Makers Market event. I did 2 others this spring, and I have 2 more coming up this fall and winter. So I teamed up with those guys. His administrative assistant brought out the tablecloths and the banners and everything. That way we're out in front of people. We can have conversations with people about what Zoe is doing and the issue of human trafficking. And then also the sales of my product, all that money goes to Zoe. I'm not in this for making money myself. This is just a hobby. And I know some guys, there was a conversation a while ago, I think it was on a coffee hour or something, about somebody made the comment that I would never sell my product because then it becomes a job. Yes, I see the truth, and I understand that. For me, it has also put a purpose behind my hobby. It has given my hobby a purpose beyond just my therapy, which it is still my therapy. But I can also, kind of pay it forward, whatever, help raise funds for Zoe International, and also be out there to help raise awareness. So that's what I'm doing. Yes, Doug.
Having said that, when you're out selling your stuff, one of the things I struggle with in the wood turning and commercial part of it is not that I don't want to donate my stuff. It's that I want to make it so that I don't undercut all my other wood turning friends who are trying to make a living at it. So how do you choose a price point on your product when you're, even though it's donating it?
The golden question. A basic bowl, the formula I use is a formula I've seen a couple guys on YouTube using, is like just a regular wooden bowl.
Yeah.
Yes, I try to price them based on market value. Because same thing. I don't want to lower my prices because it's devaluing the next guy. So basic bowl, the formula I've heard guys using is you take the diameter of the bowl, multiply that by the height, and then multiply that by 2.5. Why 2.5? I don't know. It's a number that works, I guess. But now something like this, it's
Well, I'm just going to make a comment on that because that's the formula I got introduced to 15 years ago, and it was 2.5 15 years ago. I've noticed that there's been a bit of inflation around here.
right. There is that
so
part.
I'm just wondering if anybody's actually decided to modify the equation, or if we're still going at 2.5 because Woodturners don't deserve a raise.
I think I saw on CNN it's now 2.7.
2.7.
That's all.
Yeah,
So
something like
I'll-
this. No, it's an excellent question.
I'll throw in a little bit here. So my partners and I own a glass studio. We make hot glass objects, and lighting goes around the country. We
Okay.
make chandeliers that are $50,000. make table lamps that are $300 at the low end, but
Mhm.
most of our lamps are in the $1,800 to $2,800 range. They're metal and glass. How do we come up with our prices? We base our prices on our actual legitimate costs,
Mm-hmm.
and then what the market bears based on other products that you see out in the marketplace made by professionals.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can justify any number when you do an observation, a non-scientific observation.
Mm-hmm.
You can justify a $40 price tag or a $400 price tag. So if you pull the modifier out of all the people that you see and put it down to professionals, people who earn a living
Mm-hmm.
and have managed to earn a living for a sustained period of time, you want to examine their pricing.
Right.
They may not give you directly an answer that because they're generally not systematic,
Mm-hmm.
but they've made a living at it. So
Right.
somehow they're getting it right. Those are the people you want to look at,
Right.
not your fellow hobbyists at
Mhm.
the fire hall art show or craft
Right.
show. That's not going to give you accurate information. It's
Right.
easy, but it's not accurate. So you are maintaining the lowest common denominator when you use that as your base of data.
Right.
Just wanted to throw that out because the concern that everybody has about you don't want to cut the legs out from your neighbor. Your local neighbor is one thing, but the turning community as a whole and the professionals,
Right.
those are the ones, because we all want the rain to come down from above. And the way that the prices at the lower skill level come up is when the public acknowledges and accepts those values at the
Right.
higher level. That's the only way you get there regularly.
Yeah.
So just as you're trying to figure out prices, fellas, go out and look at the professionals.
Right.
Those of you who know Michael Case as an example, or Dave Susan, we chat about this personally, and the concept of a $400 12-inch bowl could just as easily be an $800 bowl.
Right.
What's the species and what are the embellishments?
Yeah.
If there's any embellishment at all, it's $800. Now everybody in this room is probably going, "What the hell are you talking about? $800 for a bowl?" But they get it.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you ask for it, the classic case of you have a very nice house, it's on the market, it doesn't sell for a year. Take it off the market, put it on the market for another 20% higher, it will likely sell.
Mm-hmm.
You get a different market. So ask for it. Don't assume nobody will pay you. I'm
Right.
done. Thanks.
One thing I have done, and I'm going to need to do because I haven't priced these yet, is maybe this isn't on the same level, but checking on Etsy and stuff like that. What are these bowls selling for online?
And don't use the bottom number. Don't use the lowest price. That's
Right.
knock that out.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
I was gonna say, and don't forget the price of epoxy in that price.
Yeah. Right.
We got Ron Sheehan, you got your hand up.
So-
with a question.
Yeah, I got into the meeting a little bit late, but at any rate, Henry had a pretty good presentation. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
But I would like to thank all the guys that helped with the symposium last week. We had a good symposium. Moving in, moving out, all the equipment worked pretty well. So thanks everybody for stepping up.
Thank you, Ron.
All right, so I'll try to wrap up here soon. It is 9 o'clock. So what I said earlier, Tom, or any of, I want to put this out there that if any of you guys have inventory, nice, high quality bowls that you're looking to get rid of, or any kind of turnings really, that you'd like to offload, I would take them as, I would accept them as donations, you know, so that I can take along to these markets and sell them, and the money will go. Like I said, I don't keep any of the money. It all goes to Zoe International. So if any of you guys are interested in that, I have a couple events coming up. One is next week, Friday and Saturday. I'll be at the Farmhouse Market that is on Kinzer Avenue here in New Holland. I have a decent amount of inventory. It depends how stuff sells, whether or not I have enough for that event. But then I have another one coming up in December at Lancaster County Christian School. That's the first Saturday in December. So I'm a little nervous about that because I don't know that I have enough inventory for both events, even though I'm signed up for both of them. So if anybody's interested, come talk to me. And I did bring along, here is the little core out of that piece. As you can see, it has one little crack of resin in, so I didn't bother turning it. Who knows, it might be part of a future project. And then, now the monitor might be in the way, or maybe you can do, remember that little burl rough turn bowl I mentioned earlier? Well, I cast this thing on Sunday, just this past Sunday, threw it in the pressure pot, and I thought, well, at least I'll do something live for you guys, and I will demold it here for you. Now this resin, this epoxy, this is Total Boat epoxy. And it was at 115 degrees when I cast it. It was about the consistency of honey. So I'm hoping it penetrated all the cracks and stuff. We're going to call it a experiment, right?
You slide a little bit more towards your two bowls.
Yes.
We're on the overhead monitor. There you go.
Yeah, right where the mall is.
Okay. And I did coat these bowls with mold release, with plastic bowls. Oh, and Purple Bowl lives for more projects, thanks to Tyvek tape, even though it has a 1.5 inch hole in it. All right. I don't know. We'll see how this goes. Do you need a hammer? Oh, no. Ta-da. Here's that one. So far, the resin looks good. That was the same Caribbean blue, and I had some green in there, blue, green, and white that I put in there. Hope I don't make a fool of myself here. There you have it.
We call blue ball. There's wood inside there somewhere?
There is.
Yeah.
It is completely encased.
Like have a bowling ball.
Right. The trick is to try to figure out how to completely encase a piece and use the minimum amount of epoxy possible. So you end up turning away a lot of epoxy. I think that looks pretty good. Let's see what it looks like once I turn it.
It's a nice color.
Blue tends to be the most popular color.
In all things.
Like if I have a nice set of blue bowls in my booth at a maker's market, that draws people in. So anyway, that's all I got. Thank you guys. Feel free to take some minutes for this.
Well done.